Scott, I have a gift for you, and the nice thing is you can probably put this in the car, but I'm not sure you want to share it with your kids as you're driving down the road. And you'll understand that as you go, because you may have to make multiple stops as you do.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
First, I'd like to extend my gratitude to President Dorman and to the Board of Trustees, and especially to the Reverend Jim Moore for the invitation to preach the word with you today. A thank you to the family and friends of the graduates who have gathered to support them here today, and most of all, the Westminster College class of 2014. Thank you for pausing in the midst of the madness of this day to return thanks to the God who has made it all possible. Quickly, on a personal note, I realize that I am not at all the oldest person here in the room, but I would like to share with you all a truth that struck me the other day as I was preparing for this morning. It occurred to me that those of you who are graduating today were the age of my oldest daughter, Kylie, when I sat where you are right now. I'll give a moment for that to sink in for my wife in particular. Now, in all honesty, I am one who rarely harps on those kinds of realizations, but it really, honestly, doesn't seem like it was that long ago. So, since the Pittsburgh Penguins don't seem to need their playoff motto anymore, I will steal it and use it as a word of caution for the class of 2014. Buckle up, baby. But I digress. It was the summer after I graduated from this very institution. Our seats were in left field at PNC Park, in the section that was closest to the wall, a few rows back from the field itself. We were there for a friend's bachelor party. It was the Pirates versus the Astros, at that time an exhibition in futility. We had about 8 to 10 guys in our group, and we were spread out over 3 rows. In a couple of rows in front of us sat 2 young boys. I'm guessing they were around 10 years of age. They were all decked out for the game, including the baseball gloves that they brought in case someone hit a home run our way, or a generous player were to throw a ball into the crowd after warming up in between innings. In fact, during every half-inning break, when the left fielder for either team would come out to warm up with someone from the bullpen, those 2 boys would shout the players' names, pleading for a ball to be thrown their way. After a couple of innings, and likely more than a couple adult beverages, some members of our group decided to take up the cause of these 2 young boys. And so we joined them in calling out the players' names and prodding them to throw a ball to the boys. As time passed, and probably more beverages consumed, our group really got into it, yelling louder and more incessantly at the players. It's possible, I suppose, we may have even made up some stories about the boys to try to tug on the heartstrings of those players. Once it began, this ritual took place between every half inning for most of the rest of that game, and I'm pretty sure we endeared ourselves to all who had the privilege of sitting around us that day. Ultimately, however, our efforts failed. We never did get a player to throw a ball their way. Finally, though, in the 7th inning, a player got a hold of a pitch and sent it soaring in our direction. At first, we weren't sure if it had enough to clear the wall, but it did. And it landed at the other end of a row close to where the boys were sitting. A young lady, probably in her early 20s, came up with the ball, jumping up and down excitedly and holding the ball in the air like a trophy. And suddenly, there was blood in the water. Immediately, the guys in our group turned their attention to her. "Give the kids the ball! Come on, give them the ball!" Over and over again. But she just smiled, laughed, and shook her head. But that wasn't going to be enough to stop our campaign. "Give them the ball," the calls kept coming, but she refused. Finally, Dan, the loudest member of our group, stood up and yelled down to the woman, "If I can guess your name, will you give the kids the ball?" Now, I had no idea where this came from or where it was going. But I was certainly intrigued. The challenge was made a couple more times. And then the woman stood up as sure as could be and called back defiantly, "Yeah, go ahead, guess my name." Without missing a beat, Dan yelled back, "Rafaela!" Silence fell. Then the look of shock on the young woman's face. She looked at the friends around her for some sort of explanation. When none came, she walked over and simply handed the ball to the stunned boy. The place erupted with laughter and applause. It was our very own Rumpelstiltskin moment. It turns out a classmate of the young woman had been sitting behind Dan and had told him her name. The rest was simply Dan's brilliance on display. How he thought of that angle, I will never know. To show he was a good sport, Dan bought the young woman a beer, and she seemed to think that was fair. The boys stared at the ball for the rest of the game, and all lived happily ever after, except perhaps the Pirates and Astros. There is power in knowing a name. You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. But now this is what the Lord says. He who created you, Jacob, he who formed you, Israel. Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name. You are mine. Friends, the Lord knows your name, and the Lord calls you by name. On January 12th, 2013, my mother suffered a series of heart attacks that left her in the ICU, unresponsive and on life support. Less than a month later, unfortunately, she passed. Our family gathered at my mother's bedside the day that she suffered the heart attacks, and we spent quite a bit of time in the hospital over the next week or so. I found early on in our stay there that I could only stay so long in my mother's room at her bedside, seeing her in that condition and feeling so helpless. And so I often made my way out into the hall just outside of the ICU. There at the end of the hallway, our family set up a makeshift waiting room day in and day out. Now, the ICU was a limited access area, so the hallway was where we met with members of my parents' church and the community who came by to offer their sympathies and their prayers. Though we had been introduced to many folks before, we got to meet many more in those days. Often as we were sitting at the end of the hall, we would see a person or two or three walking down towards us from where the elevators were. As they drew closer, it became clear that they were there because they were friends of my parents and they had come to visit. On more than one occasion, before any other words had been spoken, one of them would look at me and say something to the effect, "You must be Scott, Dennis's son." And I would usually reply, "Please, don't insult me like that." Now, my wife and I have agreed that this seems a curious happening because neither of us think that I look a whole lot like my dad. Act like him, certainly. Have his mannerisms, undoubtedly. But honestly, I am clearly much better looking. He's over here, by the way. We just don't see what others see, I suppose. But still, it was comforting to know that I was known by my name, by people I had never met, who had come to offer support and prayer. There is power in knowing a name. You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise, you perceive my thoughts from afar. But now this is what the Lord said. He who created you, Jacob, he who formed you, Israel. Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name. You are mine. Friends, the Lord knows your name, and the Lord calls you by name. Now, I don't know about you, but I find great comfort in these words from Isaiah and David the psalmist. There is something very reassuring to me about the fact that God knows me inside and out, and has known me from before the foundations of the world were laid, intimately, nothing hidden, and still chooses to love me and to save me, even from myself. Perhaps that is why Psalm 139 has long been my favorite psalm. You hem me in behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Where can I go from your spirit, or where can I flee from your presence? For it was you who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works that I know very well. And in your book were written all the days that were formed for me, when none of them as yet existed. Now, I suppose that reality could be a bit disconcerting for some, knowing that there is nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. To me, however, it brings peace and comfort. I am known, and you are known. Our ins and outs, our ups and downs, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the everything in between. God knows us better than we even know ourselves. And still, God chooses to love us, to save us, to be with us, to be one of us even. And then God chooses to call us by name, in order to comfort and in order to direct. There is a certain comfort that comes with being in a place where your name is known. Just ask Sam Malone and Cliff Clavin and Norm Peterson. Sometimes you want to go. Even more so when the one who knows and calls you by your name is the one who created you, who redeems you, and who sustains you. I still remember well the day I received my class schedule for my first semester here at Westminster. Wide-eyed and anxious, I scanned the page, only half understanding what it was I was reading. Scared I wouldn't be able to find the classrooms, really not sure what I had gotten myself into. However, as I read over the schedule, something peculiar stood out to me. As per usual, next to the name of each class was listed the time and place it met, as well as the instructor for the class. Inquiry, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 1 p.m., Old Main, Van Dyke. Christian Education for Children, Tuesday, Thursday, 9:40 a.m., Thompson Clark Hall, Christy Donaldson. Understanding the Bible, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9:40 a.m., Old Main. But then there was something confusing. Right there where the name of the professor should have been were the letters N.A. N.A., I wondered? Not applicable? Not available? How could that be true? Classes were to start in just 2 days. How did they not know who was teaching the class? Of course, it all became clear when I walked into the room for the first session. Dr. Kong Na, last name spelled N.A., was beginning his first semester as a professor of Bible at Westminster College, the same time I was beginning my first semester as a student. As a Christian education major, I would see that name many more times on my schedule of classes before graduating. There's power in knowing a name. You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise, you perceive my thoughts from afar. But now this is what the Lord says. He who created you, Jacob, he who formed you, Israel. Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name. You are mine. Friends, the Lord knows your name, and the Lord calls you by your name. A little later today, each of you graduates will hear your name called. That moment for which you have all been waiting. You will rise from your seat, walk across the stage, and receive the diploma for which you have worked so hard these last 4, or in some cases 5 or more years. And in bold, fancy letters, right in the center of that paper will be your name. No one else's name, but yours. And in that moment, when your name is called before all who have gathered, perhaps, you will sense a portion of what it means to hear God call your name. On one hand, it will bring comfort and relief. All the hard work, hours of study, days of procrastination have paid off. And this is your reward. A piece of paper that represents all that you have done here. On the other hand, it will bring apprehension and anxiety. What is next? Where do I go from here? A piece of paper to show others that you have certain skills and abilities that need to be put to good use. Well, when God calls your name, the same is true, but on a wholly different level. On one hand, it means peace and security. You have searched me, and you know me. Known and loved fully, never lost, never alone. When the rest of the world seems to have forgotten who we are, when we have forgotten, God knows, and God calls. Come to me, you that are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. This is a joy-filled, celebratory day, as it should be. But not all days are like this. You don't need me to tell you that. On those days when the joy and happiness and hope of this day seem like a distant memory or even a dream, remember that God knows and calls you by name. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. And in that truth, find comfort. On the other hand, sometimes when God calls your name, it means something different. You know, those times when God, like your parents, throws in your middle name too? Perhaps it is because you have strayed from the straight and narrow, but more often than not, it is because God has something important, perhaps eternally significant, for you to do. For Abraham, it was to be the father of many nations. For Moses, it was to lead his people out of slavery and to the promised land. For Elijah, it was to speak truth to power. For Peter, it was to be the rock on which the church is built. For Paul, it was to take the good news to the Gentiles. All called by name, and yours shall be called as well. Called by name to serve, to use the gifts, talents, imagination, and love God has given to you to do your part in ushering in the kingdom and in making this world better with each passing day. In these last years, you have made a name for yourself, and that means something. It carries a certain weight, and no one knows that name better than the one who knew you before you ever even had a name. That same one will continue to call your name, at times to comfort you, and at times to challenge you. The choice is yours, whether or not you will answer. I, for one, hope that you will, for your sake and for the sake of this world. God bless you, class of 2014. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.